Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Hello from me and the dog. I've got a little bookcase that I'm going to make over today. It's the type of furniture that I absolutely love. It's solid wood. It is wax, so I'm going to have to take that wax off first. I'm not going to go through it on this video, but if you want to see how I remove wax, I'll put a video link up top right now. I never know which side it is. I'll put a video up now and you can go and have a look at that, and that is basically how I strip wax to get it ready for painting. And then I'm going to show you what I do to make over this piece. So I've pretty much finished stripping the wax off this and getting it ready to paint. I just wanted to point out a few things on this piece to explain why I might be doing the finish that I'm doing, and one of them being is the style of the piece. So I'm a believer that you kind of work with the piece. So this is extremely rustic. It's got lots of age-related knocks and bumps. The wood itself is a rustic kind of wood. It's also got these hand-carved details here. So all of those things are going to make it a rustic piece. To try and get that to a perfectly painted finish, I'd be fighting the piece, and I don't want to fight anything. For that reason, I'm going to choose a really kind of rustic finish, and that is quite often the case. When I find pieces of furniture, I kind of look at it and kind of establish what style would suit it best. Now, I am naturally drawn to like a rustic finish, a chippy finish, a distress finish. That's just my personal preference. But I do think that if I was trying to paint this a perfect finish, I'd be forever filling gaps and holes, and there's big knots in the wood. So I'm going to embrace all of those things, and that is kind of why I'm choosing the finish that I'm choosing. Okay, so I decided on the colour Mint Julep. It's a chalk mineral paint colour from Dixie Belle, and I haven't used this colour for ages, and that's why it's a little thick in the tub. That's not normally the consistency. Also, I'm pretty bad at putting lids on tubs. So if you just caught that, I added a lot of sea spray in, which is going to make a really thick paste. You can see how thick it is. It's not coming off my stirrer. And I'm going to apply it with a natural bristle brush. This is just a chip brush from Dixie Belle Paint again. And I'm just going to apply it really randomly all over the surface. Now, it's that thick. It's not sitting in all of the carved details. I'm not looking for full coverage. What I'm trying to do here is build up lots of random texture on the surface, which is going to help me get that chippy look at a later stage. So the sides of the bookcase are just a plain flat surface. There's no detail on them like there is on the front. And sometimes that's the hardest place to make a piece look authentically chippy and distressed, because it's not really somewhere that would get a lot of wear and tear. It's normally pieces that are sticking out, corners, edges, any carved detail. So for this, I kind of adopt a paint fashion that is most similar to how a toddler might paint, and I hold my brush in quite an odd way, and that allows for randomness on the surface, because if I apply the paint all over in exactly the same way, i.e. just stippling it all over, it's just going to give me really consistent, uniform marks, which is not how a piece would authentically age. So if you normally hold your paint at the bottom, which is where you get the most control and you get a nice even consistent sort of pressure on the surface, I hold mine right at the end to apply texture, and this is getting really thick now. It's drying up, so I'm going to work quick, but I'll show you what I mean. But if you just think how a child paints and do that. So the key is randomness, no controlled marks. I want to create a real sort of mixture of marks on the surface, some areas thick, some areas thin. And then I've also got these rubber paintbrushes that I bought off Amazon, which are really good for scooping a little bit of that mixture out. And I'm just sort of adding it to the corner here so that when it dries, I can chip away at the corners. This is really drying up now, so For the inside, I am just going to, there's quite a lot of product still in there. I'm going to add some water into this to make it a thinner solution. Obviously, I've still got the sea spray in there, which is going to sort of hold a little bit of texture still. But I'm just going to mix some water, and basically that'll just make it a thinner solution, and hopefully it'll go on more like a bit of a crumbly wash. We'll see. So obviously this piece was stripped of the wax, and that means I'm painting this onto raw wood, which means it's going to soak into the grain. The grain is also quite rough and raised, which is just going to help me kind of distress it at a later stage. But all I'm doing is basically putting one coat of this paint wash on the inner bit of the bookcase. So that's the first coat on. I'm in a bit of a mess, but it's fun, and it's a really quick way to paint as well. So for the second coat, I am going to use the leftover mint julep, which, like I say, has gone very thick in the tub because I left the lid off by accident. And then I'm going to add the smallest amount of tree frog green, which is just going to make it lean, slightly greener, and just give a really subtle contrast between the first coat and the second coat. I did only add a tiny bit of tree frog green, but it's just going to give me some slight tonal variation in my paint colour and just add a little bit of interest. And also what I'm going to do, as this is drying, I'm going to get my water bottle, spritz. I'm just going in small areas. So I'm putting a coating of tap water, that's just tap water in that bottle. I'm going to get my sea spray, and then I'm going to throw it at the piece of furniture. Crazy. So what the sea spray is going to do is act as a resist, and obviously once I had then thrown it on in random areas, some were clumpy, some were sort of finer areas, I then gave it a spritz of water, which means it's going to dry hard instead of crumbling off when I apply my second coat. So for the second coat, I waited until all of that sea spray on the surface was dry. You can just see some of it there in the bottom right. Some of it will come off when you paint. It's just how, you know, the nature of it. It is a crumbly texture. And I saw my friend Chris Dorner do this technique on a piece, and it works really well for a distressed finish. So I will drop the link to her YouTube channel below, and if you want to go and have a look at her videos, she does some really cool distress finishes as well. So now for the distressing, and I am going to use quite a large variety of ways of distressing this piece, and that is because variety gives you a little bit more authenticity. So for the inner part of the bookcase where I did the wash, I'm just running my sander over the top, and that's just going to reveal that really rough sawn wood grain. For the sides, I'm going to use this scraper. These are really sharp scrapers, and it will take anything back to bare wood. This is freshly painted also, so bear that in mind. The paint is super soft. I do prefer distressing when it is a little bit soft. The longer you leave your paint to distress, the tougher it gets, especially with chalk mineral paint, because obviously it dries over time and cures. This is a slightly blunter blade, which gives you more of kind of like a knocked finish. And also this tiny little carbide scraper. This is just a smaller version of the one that I used first. And then finally, I've got these little wire brushes from Amazon. They come in a pack and they have various different bristles, so that kind of helps. And if you do struggle with having to leave your paint before you can distress it, so I had to go and pick the kids up from school, and then it was kind of tea time and all the rest of it, if you give your paint a spritz of water, it will soften it up slightly. It doesn't reactivate it like it would if I was using terra clay paint, but it does make it slightly softer. So for the sides, I just went in with my sander. So remember, I had created all these random different types of texture on the sides. So I went in with a 220 grit paper on my sander and just gently worked away at the texture that I'd built up. And the distressing actually took longer than the painting itself. It's funny how that kind of works, isn't it? You paint on the piece to then take it off. Anyway, the whitewash that I'm going to apply now was a mixture of Fluff, chalk mineral paint, and water, and all this is just going to do is soften that whole look a little bit. If you struggle to get the paint wash off, give your surface a spritz of water and that will just take off the whitewash if you are struggling, if it just wants to soak into what you've painted underneath. And then to seal it, I'm going to use wax, obviously, because I'm a wax gal. For all the detail, I'm using a French tip brush, which has just got a point on it, which means I can work it into all of the detail. And then for the rest of the piece, I just used a blue sponge because I just find it really quick and easy to add wax this way. It gives you a nice, thin, even coat of wax as well. And as always, I'm going to add some coloured wax, and this is going to age the piece dramatically and add shading, depth and all those kinds of things. So I'm using Best Dang Wax in brown. Again, I'm using the French tip brush on the carved areas, and I'm just applying it all over because what I want to do is make the brown wax sit in all the detail, and then with a shop cloth, or you can use a lint-free rag, just wipe off the excess. So this is going to take off the brown wax in all of the high areas and leave it in the recessed areas, which gives you a really three-dimensional look, as well as adding a little bit of age to it as well. So that's relatively easy on the carved pieces. You obviously want to push the recessed pieces into the background and bring the sort of three-dimensional pieces to the foreground, and that gives you that three-dimensional look. For the back of the bookcase, for the inner bit, obviously where dust and grime would naturally sit is in all the corners. So I'm going to use a French tip brush and work my way around all the corners and edges. And then with the excess wax that's on my brush, I didn't really apply much more wax to it. I kind of swirled it over the entire surface of the rest of the bookcase, including any kind of flat areas, and then again just use my rag and wiped it off. And what you can do as well is the original sponge that you use to apply the clear wax, you can actually use that as an eraser if you want to take any of that brown wax right back and just reveal the colour underneath. The sides, again, usually the most awkward place because they're flat and pretty boring. So all I did is I used the Best Dang brush with the brown wax, swirled it all over the piece. I wasn't bothered if it was a bit patchy, that's not a problem. And then again, worked the majority of the wax away. So you're applying wax to kind of take it off again. It's a bit counterproductive, but it kind of sits in all of the texture that you've created and all the distressed details. Again, I just use my sponge to remove the majority of the brown wax, but it does kind of sit in all, like I say, all of those textured areas that you've created with your distressing, and it just gives a nice kind of warm, antique-y kind of look. The final step when you've waxed a piece is to give it a buff. So I use microfiber cloth, but you can use a lint-free rag as well. And once the wax has been sat there on the surface for kind of half an hour or so, just go in and buff it all over, and that's going to remove any excess and give you a nice shine. So here's a mega close-up of that mega chippy finish. Here's the sides and the top as well, because I didn't show those too much in the video. So that's how they turned out. And I just kept the staging super simple with this one, and I must say I love how it turned out. Thank you as always for watching the video, it's much appreciated. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you next time. Bye!